Good morning. This is Everett Beckner subbing for Frank Vale, back with you again to bring you another program of This and That, brought to you by the Farmers and Stockmen's Bank. This morning, we believe that we have a very interesting program to offer you, the listener, by tape recording. In the studio earlier, yours truly had the opportunity of interviewing two young members of our community who have recently returned from the 4th Annual United Nations Pilgrimage for Youth. This message from the Farmers and Stockmen's Bank of Clayton, and then we will hear the story of their trip and some of the highlights in their experiences. You've often heard it said that theory is a fine thing, but without some practical experience, it usually is of little value to the individual. And so it is with education, high school, college, and then continued study along the lines you have majored in. The knowledge gained is priceless. But add to that knowledge the experience of travel, and, like experience that we mentioned earlier, you are so much better able to speak with confident authority. All of these things cost money. There's always someone who pays. Every parent wants his child to get all the education he can, and travel, I believe, just comes naturally. So the way to make sure that your children get that education and travel is to save during the childhood years for their future. It's not a difficult habit to continue, but sometimes it's a difficult habit to form. It's sort of like writing a letter. It isn't really a hard job, but it's so much trouble to get started. So why don't you start today at the Farmers and Stockmen's Bank of Clayton? Remember, they pay 2% on time deposits. And now let's see what our guests have to say about their experiences with the United Nations Pilgrimage for Youth. We might just take this time to tell you that the United Nations Pilgrimage for Youth was sponsored by the Oddfellows and Rebekahs of the United States and Canada. So, first off this morning, I'd like to introduce Kendyl Monroe and Dolores Brea. Say hello to our audience, will you?
Hello.
Howdy.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the young lady, Dolores, to tell us first the purpose of the trip you have just returned from.
The purpose of the trip was to learn more about how the United Nations worked and just what it meant to the world. It was very interesting to know the different organizations that were interested in the UN.
Well, fine. Now I'd like to ask Kendyl to tell us, starting from the beginning, something about the different places you visited before you got to the United Nations.
Well, it's nearly impossible to tell all the places we went in the short time we have. We went from Clayton to Fort Worth by train. From Fort Worth was where we started out on the bus tour. There were 3 states represented, the Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. We had to get up early at Fort Worth so we could make it to Greenville, Texas in time for a radio broadcast at 8 o'clock. And we drove on all day to Memphis, Tennessee for lodging. Next day we just drove all day to Chattanooga, Tennessee for lodging. Next day we also drove on to Roanoke. Then the next day at Charlottesville, Virginia, we visited Monticello, the home of Jefferson. This was our first sightseeing stop. Then from Monticello we went directly on to Washington, D.C., arriving there late in the evening. We spent the night there, and in the evening for entertainment we were driven around town in our bus with a guide who pointed out certain places, and we visited the Library of Congress and other points of interest. Next day we spent the whole of the day in Washington visiting just about everything there was to see. Some of the places, for example, were the Capitol, the White House, Arlington Cemetery, National Art Gallery, just everything there was, really. And we spent the night there also. The next day was we went on to Philadelphia. We stopped in Baltimore on the way to visit the Sovereign Grand Lodge of the Oddfellows, and also visited Fort McHenry, where Francis Scott Key was held captive and where he wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. In Philadelphia we went and saw the Betsy Ross home and the Independence Hall where the Liberty Bell and the first governmental buildings of the United States were. We drove on from Philadelphia to Norristown, which is right near Valley Forge, where we were put up for the night with a group from Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and Alberta. The Oddfellows of Norristown gave us a little party that night in their hall, where we had some dancing and refreshments. Then the next morning was Sunday, and we took a bus tour all the way through Valley Forge. Our bus drove all through there with a guide pointing out the various points of interest. We went to church in the Lutheran church there at Norristown, and then had a box lunch en route as we went on to New York City, where we arrived there at about 3:30.
Thank you, Kendyl. I think just maybe turn you both loose here for a little while and let you tell us, maybe how many young people were on this tour and of how many states were represented. I think that's pretty well been pointed out. But tell us something about what you liked best about the whole trip, and, well, just anything else of interest that you think our listeners would like to hear.
Well, there were 32 of the kids on the bus tour. There were 6 from Oklahoma, 15 from Texas, and 11 from New Mexico. Texas had already sent 2 others on the delegation that left from New Orleans about 2-3 weeks earlier.
I see. Well, Dolores, I don't guess you could actually point it out, but what maybe interested you most about the trip? What did you find special interest in?
I believe the building, the United Nations building, was the most fascinating to me.
How long did you spend in the building? Well, thereabouts, for the most part, could you say?
Well, we were there almost every day.
For
at least part of the day. Sometimes we weren't there at all. Sometimes, like the first 2-3 days, we spent the whole day there. We even ate there at the United Nations building.
How many?
One thing I forgot to mention a while ago was that we had 4 leaders along with us. There was Mrs. Leona Staggers from Oklahoma, Mrs. Vesey Beavers from New Mexico, and Mr. and Mrs. I.L. Hood, who were the pilgrimage directors as far as this delegation was concerned. They were from Fort Worth.
I see. Well, who bore the actual expense of the trip? Was it completely borne by the Oddfellows and Rebekahs?
Well, most of them were by the Oddfellows and Rebekahs, and we learned later that some of the parents shared the expense.
The United Nations itself didn't pay anything toward the financing of the trip. Well, getting on into a few other questions at random, how about a comment or two on Canada, your opinion of Canada and its difference maybe to the United States in any way?
Well, what we saw of it, it was nearly like the United States. The people were, of course, different. They were very courteous. You might call them a cool courtesy.
I see. The French language is spoken largely in some parts of it, isn't it? Or in Quebec, at least. You weren't in that area.
Yes, but in Ontario, it was mostly English.
It was mostly English in Ontario.
Well, at Norristown, where we were with this group from British Columbia and Alberta, we found that they are required to take at least 2 years of French in their high school education.
I see. They still impress French upon their students, at least. Well, how about some opinions of New York City itself?
Well, it was a city of wonderment to gaze at all the signs and the lights, and it was just a huge place of many buildings.
I can imagine. How about you, Kendyl? You'd been there before, unless I'm mistaken. Was there anything?
Yes, I hardly remembered it, though.
I see.
I will say that it's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't live there.
Wouldn't want to leave. That's generally the opinion that a person coming from an area such as ours gets of a larger city. Well, I think that pretty well answers this next question I had here as to where you'd rather live, there or in New Mexico. I don't believe we need to go into that any further. Well, you were allowed to take cameras along, I'm sure, and photograph whatever you might desire, were you not?
Well, in most places we were. There were a few places, especially in Washington, where they wouldn't let us have any cameras at all. Especially in Congress, where we had to check our cameras.
Well, then you couldn't say then it was as the Russians told Adlai Stevenson here a while back when he went to take pictures over in Germany. As you remember, they said that, you know, you aren't allowed to do this in the United States.
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
That's a little hard to for us to grasp here, where we just take them out at random and snap whatever we may choose. Well, how about the people in the various towns that you met?
Well, of course, in the East is just really a different kind of people. It's more thickly populated, and I suppose the people figure that they'll never see you again anyway, so they don't care particularly what impression they do give on you. One thing I did notice, though, was that no matter how rude or the like these other people were, the Oddfellows were always courteous to us.
Yes, had very good treatment as a whole, then you might say.
Yes.
Well, this is just a bit of an unusual question, or unnecessary question, I'm sure, but you could feel that this was a worthwhile trip, did you?
Yes, indeed. Educational as well as having lots of fun.
I can imagine it would be so. Well, could you give us some of the good things, the opinions, the ideas, or the conceptions that you may have gotten as or have derived from this trip?
In connection with what?
Well, say in your opinion of the United Nations, first of all. We'll get right down to business.
Well, that would, of course, be a large thing to tackle. I myself have gained much more hope than I had ever had in the United Nations, because you read in the papers almost every day where one of these big-name commentators has decided that the UN is a flop and that they're ready to give it up and everything else. But when we went back there and we were given talks by the people of the smaller organizations that never do make the headlines, like FAO and technical assistance and so forth, you can't help but have renewed hope in the United Nations.
You don't feel then that perhaps the United Nations has outgrown its original purpose, that it actually does have a place in this world community in which we live today?
Well, there's no doubt of that. It's obvious after you have the chance to observe it as we did that they are doing plenty of work and that they're really doing good to these smaller countries, which are usually the cause of great controversy.
Well, then you do feel, as I'm sure most people do, that the United Nations in itself is equipped in the bylaws and the statutes to serve as a world government, but could you say that right now you feel it's accomplishing its purpose?
As a world government?
Yes. Or as a world...
Well, in a way, yes. I don't believe that the United Nations is ever striving to eventually control the world as a government or force.
No.
But they are trying to improve the world, and especially where we were concerned was the Trusteeship Council, which is aims at eventual independence of all present-day colonies, which just goes to show that they are trying to get peace and a sort of democracy throughout the world.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. Well, what would you, well, you've pretty well answered what you actually think its purpose is. It is to obtain democracy for all the countries throughout the world, and through that same medium, then, we would be obtaining a peaceful world in which to live. Well, getting on to a subject of, in a way, political significance, do you think that with the signing of a truce in Korea that the United Nations has justified itself? Well, by that I mean, according to all reports, a great many billions of dollars has gone into the development of the United Nations. And would you say that it's been a worthwhile effort?
Yes, I would say it's been a worthwhile effort if they can only control the communism that is in Korea.
Well, as the United Nations is set up now, it seems that it is blocked at almost every attempt by the veto power of the Socialist Republic of Russia, so to speak. And apparently there's no way of getting around it. And yet, we've spent billions of dollars in founding the United Nations. Can you see a well, a way of ever getting our money out of it as it stands now?
Well, I think we will just have to go along with them and just hope.
Just hope
Just help them all we can, the
Well,
way they are doing.
For the most part, it looks like it's going to take a change in heart on the part of the communists, doesn't it, right now? At least it's hard to see a way out simply by changing, the Constitution, so to speak. We can amend our Constitution very easily, but to get the Constitution of the United Nations amended to such an effect would probably be very difficult. Well, then you'd say that you think it's here to stay?
Yes, I would say so. I think it's definitely here to stay.
Well, it needs to be, and yet every day we hear some commentator, some news report, or even some politician voice very loudly that he feels that it's on its way out, that through the failure of the United States to win a military victory in Korea, that perhaps it's now doomed. And yet you say you feel it's here to stay.
Well, after seeing it and the work they were doing, of course, that's a very wide subject. It could more than likely a ban, but I believe and hope that it does continue its work.
How about you, Kendyl?
Well, like I was talking of a while ago, we were given a first-hand view of what the United Nations does that doesn't hit the headlines every day.
Yes.
Like this representative from FAO was telling us that they go on and they work what is to them miracles with these less civilized people than we are, and nothing ever happens, but let a little bit of corruption start up in their organization or something. Of course, that hits the headlines right away.
Yes.
So really, we just read the bad news on the headlines, and it's going to take some trip like we just returned from to really educate us in what the United Nations is doing.
What is this FAO you speak
Well,
of?
that's the Food and Agricultural Organization that supplies all these underfed countries with food and necessary assistance towards agricultural development. And it works hand in hand with the Technical Assistance Program, which we were shown, which tries to develop these countries to a more modern status.
Trying to give them more up-to-date agricultural methods as well as the machinery and the money that they naturally need, I suppose.
Yes, that's right.
Well, by some of the recent investigations in the past, it seems that there's a belief by some of the United Nations that, shall we say in simple language, that the United Nations was more or less a breeding ground for communism in order that it might better their inroads into the United States. Do you think there's much truth to that?
Well, from my observation, of course, I can tell, but it definitely looked like they were working together. Except a few occasions I noticed in the trusteeship council they were kind of pro and con, especially Russia. They were against nearly every
Disagreeing,
issue.
as usual, you might say. But, well, it'd be hard for you just looking on to say whether there was communist breeding in the United Nations or not, I
That's
suppose.
correct.
Well, there is a light of hope, though. The director in New York, Mr. Conrad Hansen, who has been on this pilgrimage of every year, these 4 years that it has been going on, says that this is the first year he's ever seen Russia vote in a favorable manner. That is, they did vote yes once in a while, although they did mostly abstain or vote negative.
I see. Well, just one more question now. We have got a little bit of time yet. We'll see how much time we can spend on it. It's one that I've thought of many times, and as to what the reaction would be if every medium of advertising that we have today which dispenses news, if each and every one of these were to take 1 month and give out only the best news that was obtainable every day for that entire month, could the American people stand it? Well, before you answer that one, I'd just like to say that I'm associated with these newscasts most every day, not once, but 3, 4, 5 times per day. And I think you know as well as I do that the big stories every day are the stories of tragedy, of death, misery, war, and the like. 99% of every newscast is taken up with the worst things that are happening every day. It seems that's the only thing that can make news. You and I know that while there are all of these terrible things happening, actually there are many good things happening too. Would it seem logical to you that there is a possibility that our present concepts of keeping the people in the world properly advised of the news are failing in these purposes?
Well, I would say that, of course, you radio broadcasters try to give the public what they want, and if they seem more interested in the bad news, that's just the way they have it.
Mm-hmm.
But it would appear to me that if there was some sort of a drive, so to speak, towards letting the public in on more of the so-called good news, on the better side of the news, on the accomplishments of the United Nations and like organizations, that they probably would take a deeper interest.
Well, generally speaking, the things that make news aren't the accomplishments of a certain group, because those pretty well go unnoticed, but it's where they fall down, some failing, or in a case where someone has resigned a post because of his ineffectuality in that position. It's not where a person succeeds. It seems that these are the only things that make news, and that's what the public wants. However, it does seem apparent that if the public were to be given just, well, a glance at such happenings as these and reverse the situation and maybe give them more of the good things that are happening, it would probably lead to a better feeling among the people, to say the least, as to the world situation. Well, getting back to your United Nations trip now, let's try to sum up as best we can just exactly what was gained once again, what you felt influenced you most on this trip.
Well, I enjoyed every part of it, especially the friendship with the other kids. They were just wonderful. And learning about the different ways of life, how one country can be so different in different parts of it. And in the educational part, historic places of interest in the United Nations itself was definitely a wonderful trip and experience.
I'm sure it was. How about you, Kendyl?
Well, it's almost impossible for me to state exactly what impressed me the most or anything of the likes. It seems to me that I'll just have to wait for the months or even the years to go by and then try to think back and see what I can remember the best.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the whole trip is a wonder in itself. Thinking on the trip, it just doesn't seem very much, but after you get home and you think how you were just one of the very few who have even been out of your state, so to speak, it really does impress you more, because not everybody gets to go on a long trip.
Yes,
and of course, since our trip was very well planned, we saw many things that the common tourist doesn't even think of getting to see.
Sure, that's true. You'll never be able to possibly put your finger on some of the benefits that you have gained from this trip. It's a rare experience for anyone, and especially at your age, when principles and concepts can be learned very easily. You don't have to dislodge false beliefs. You can truly gain immeasurable benefit, I'm sure, from a trip such as this.
That's right, because, of course, we were only shown the facts. There were no lies or anybody trying to be a hypocrite or anything of that sort. So we don't have to come home and then try to sort out the truth from the fallacies.
I'm sure that's true. It's been a trip of immeasurable value, as I've said before, I'm sure, for both of you. Well, I believe we've just about used up our time now. Is there any comment that either one of you would like to say before?
I think the show will be transcribed your way.
Well, there isn't much else to say, I don't believe, except that, of course, we just can't thank the Oddfellows and Rebekah enough for affording us this opportunity, which is, of course, the chance of a lifetime, because it's assured that we'll never have anything like that again.
That's true. We can never thank them enough for the wonderful trip that we've come back from.
I'm sure that's true in the way of both personal friendships established and the good you've gotten from the trip itself, the tour, and the knowledge of the United Nations that you've gained. Well, we'd like to thank you, Kendyl and Dolores, Kendyl Monroe and Dolores Brea, for being with us and bringing to the listeners of KLMX some very interesting information. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and on behalf of the Farmers and Stockmen's Bank, may I say that I sincerely hope that the memories of this trip will stay with you always and be cherished among your souvenirs, and I'm sure from your comments here that they shall be just that. As I'm sure you know, a lot of different things go toward making up a happy, prosperous community. But the Farmers and Stockmen's Bank believes that one of the most important factors can be summed up in the old phrase of supply and demand. Your friendly hometown merchants pay you the compliment of assuming that you use cents before you spend dollars. So they keep their stores well stocked with the standard brands they know you prefer, nationally advertised merchandise of guaranteed quality. They back up every claim made for their products. And then there's the problem of service. Remember that the same dealer who sells you a standard brand product also offers you expert repair and maintenance service, approved by the product's manufacturer. When you purchase some off-brand product from out of town, you not only run the risk of getting less than what you paid for, but maintenance service is less readily available, if at all. When you buy guaranteed products at home, the proper service and maintenance is always as near as your telephone. Think about it a little, and you can understand the resentment a businessman can't be blamed for feeling when you call upon him to service an off-brand product you purchased elsewhere. A product that sacrifices quality in order to sell at a only slightly lower price. Your hometown bank believes that Clayton has a group of businessmen as honest and conscientious as any you'll find anywhere, as interested in keeping your customers' friendship as they are in making a profit. But on the practical side, your local businessmen know that only by offering you standard brand merchandise of assured quality can they hope to keep your continued patronage and goodwill. In a town of Clayton's size, it's impossible for a businessman to rely on one-time purchases. Satisfied customers who return for repeated purchases are necessary for his business's profitable operation and even existence. You can depend on every local businessman to do his part to help keep Clayton, the town, with an assured future. The Farmers and Stockmen's Bank urges you to do your part by spending your money where your patronage is valued and appreciated. You've heard it said many times, but it can't be said too often. Buy at home and help Clayton grow, and at the same time, help yourself. You have been listening to a tape-recorded interview with two students from the Clayton High School, Kendyl Monroe and Dolores Brea, who have just returned from the United Nations Youth Pilgrimage, sponsored by the Oddfellows and Rebekah Lodge. Your announcer has been Everett Beckner.
Noble Grands, Mrs. Ferguson and Mr. Kirby, Rebekah's and Oddfellows. To tell you the truth, words really fail me at this time. You know, in a book I got from Dad, didn't know about it though. And after dinner, speaker's supposed to base his speech on the humorous side, but I'm afraid I can't live up to that tonight. There's very little about that trip that was really humorous that would deserve wasting our time on that tonight. So if you'll bear with me for a few moments, I'll try to tell you just what I believe you are interested in, mostly about my trip, and that would be all the various Oddfellows that we seen along the way, the activities they were engaged in, and so forth. As most of you know, or should know, or soon will know, I and Dolores Brea, who is unable to be with us tonight, recently returned from a trip to covering 16 states of the United States, District of Columbia, and one province of Canada. We figure we traveled a total of at least 5,000 miles. For 32 pilgrims on this trip, 12 boys and 20 girls. 11 were from New Mexico, 6 from Oklahoma, and Texas, as usual, was in the lead with 15. I understand that the reason for there being so many more girls on this trip lies solely in the fact that the Rebekahs in these other 2 states, where the delegates were chosen more or less at large instead of through contests, these Rebekahs pushed the whole thing much more than their counterpart in the opposite sex. What I'm going to try to express tonight is just what the Odd Fellowship was like in all these various places. Even this is a difficult subject and could be very lengthy. Our leaders were the first example of Odd Fellowship. Mrs. Bessie Beavers of Santa Fe, sponsoring the New Mexico group. Mrs. Leona Staggers of Tonkawa, Oklahoma, with the Oklahoma group, and the pilgrimage directors were Mr. and Mrs. Hood, I.L. Hood from Fort Worth. They also were representing the Texas delegation. I believe these were all more or less prominent Oddfellows and Rebekahs in their respective localities, and as best as I could judge, they were about the best leaders that could have been picked. I'm going to try to tell you tonight of just more or less the outstanding deeds performed by these Oddfellow groups. Everywhere we went, we were treated by the Oddfellows, even if we didn't see them. Whenever we stopped somewhere for lunch or supper, I understand that the Oddfellows of that town paid for our meals. So even though we didn't see them, they were treating us. I even understand that some of our hotel bills were paid by the Oddfellows. And that was no small matter at all. At most of our meal stops, though, where we were fed by supper much like we had tonight, it was again mostly the work of the Rebekahs that catered us that way. That is, they're the ones that prepared the meals, they're the ones that met us and tried to make us feel as much at home as possible. Our first real example of Oddfellow friendship was at Roanoke, Virginia. After 3 hard days of travel, and that hard was really something. And we had then become exposed to what I like to term the Eastern egotism, because they just seemed different people to me back there. Anyway, these Oddfellows and Rebekahs, the Oddfellows were very well represented there at Roanoke. Showed us just about as good a time as have been Old Home Week here at Clayton. They entertained us, they introduced us to various dignitaries there of both groups. They even gave us little presents of candy and gum and so forth, postcards, and they were even stamped, and other things to make our trip much more enjoyable, and I believe they accomplished their objective. Our next contact with Odd Fellowship was our most honorable, so to speak, and most enjoyable. That was at the Sovereign Grand Lodge in Baltimore. We accomplished a great deal there, even though we were there just very, very shortly. We didn't stop for dinner or anything. We just came there and spent a very short time touring there, and then went right on out eating our lunch on the bus. Grand Secretary Ludwigson was our host during most of this tour through the Sovereign Grand Lodge. He first gave us a short talk on Odd Fellowship, its origin, principles, objectives, background, and other interesting history. Then he showed us through his vault, where he has a large collection of replicas from the early days of Odd Fellowship. He seems to have made that his hobby, I suppose, because he really had a lot of displays there. One of the most interesting displays was a $10,000 grandsire stone. It was a very beautiful thing made out of, I think, some 200 cut diamonds, something like that. Then we were guided from the vault up to the second floor, where we were shown the Sovereign Grand Master's office and the council room. Both of these rooms were very delicately decorated, mostly hand-carved, I understand. Next was the Oddfellows in Norristown, Pennsylvania, where we enjoyed their close companionship. There we were joined with a group from Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and Alberta. This group was just returning from New York, as we were just going there. The Oddfellows there at Norristown supplied us with a full program of entertainment for that night. In their lodge hall, wasn't too much bigger than this one, and they had jitterbugging and square dancing and just about everything. Free refreshments in the back room. They had another adjoining room that had lounging chairs and a piano in there. The piano was kept busy most of the night. And various other things that was really enjoyable. All the Oddfellows turned out on that. As a matter of fact, I don't recall seeing a Rebekah that time. It was just about different every place we went. The most particularly interesting thing about our stay then was the fact that we were with this group from Canada. Two of the states represented there were from Canada. These people were amazed at our language. They, even more so than the Easterners, they didn't seem to think much of it, but the Washingtonians and the Oregon people really were amazed to be standing out there and somebody come up to you and say something. You'd look at him questioningly and say, "What?" I want to hear a Western drawl, Southern accent, something like that. When we ate supper that night, we ate together, and of course we mixed up pretty well. Some of the boys at a different table told me that one of the boys from Washington took out a notebook and wrote down every word he thought we said peculiarly. It was quite an experience, but they were a fine group, and it was really an experience talking to those Canadians and finding out just our similarities and differences. All the Canadians said that they were always being referred to as Eskimos. They had told some of the Easterners that they rode in on their dog sleds to get to the bus station. One girl told me that she thought New Mexico was all Indians, and another said she thought it was all Mexicans. So we got quite a lot adjusted there, I believe. Well, the next example of odd fellowship was in New York. This was really one of the biggest ones, because our first night there, which was Sunday night, we ate at Tuffanetti's, which is one of the more prominent restaurants of the city. And there, many of the officials of the state lodge there in New York were there to greet us and to be introduced. And of course, being an official of the state in New York is really something, because they're so populous over there. Then Conrad Hansen, our pilgrimage director, who spent all of his summer tramping the streets of New York with 400 kids from time to time, was really a fine man. And Cecil Taylor, who was there only with some of the groups, and we were fortunate enough to have him there, and he was a fine man to be associated with. In the stay at New York, we were joined together with 40 more pilgrims from the East. These kids, though, didn't get to have any bus tour since they lived so close to New York. They just came in on the trains and so forth, and spent the week there in New York. Of course, there were 4 leaders among them. They were from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Vermont, and Delaware. So we really had a variety there. I'll try to tell some more of New York City later, but right now I'll continue on with the Odd Fellowship portion of this speech. Some of the places we visited hadn't even heard of the pilgrimage and didn't hardly know anything of the Oddfellow youth movement. Of course, our leaders took care of that in a short time. That occurred pretty frequently, and I think our leaders contributed quite a lot to telling these people of the movement and trying to get them interested in this pilgrimage, which they hope to be on the increase next year, making it a bigger one. Now, our next contact with Odd Fellowship was in Canada, where they were very courteous to us. It seemed much more courteous than anyone in the States, so to speak. I suppose I understand that that's supposed to be from their French background. At any rate, we really did have a time with the Canadian Oddfellows. At Tilbury, Ontario, where we stopped for supper one night, but we had to go on. We didn't stay there all night. We even had the mayor there to officially welcome us. But he was just rushed in and said howdy and walked out. Anyway, it seemed an honor to us, at least. And the Oddfellows and Rebekahs had decorated the hall, crepe paper strung all over, and they really had a welcoming committee there for us. I believe that was one of our more enjoyable stops. At Fort Wayne, Indiana is one thing I really do like to brag on for the Oddfellows. They had just dedicated their new Oddfellow building there about 2 weeks before we arrived, so paint was still wet on it, so to speak. It was one of the most modern buildings I had seen. It was just as modern as the United Nations and all the other buildings there in New York. And I understand that this was built strictly through the work of the Oddfellows, that there's been out there working, soliciting. I suppose they've been putting on various things, activities to get more money up. The lodge hall was very modernly built. It was modernly furnished and decorated. All of it was, for that matter. The dining room, the kitchen had all brand new modern kitchenware and stoves and all. The dining room had, of course, all indirect lighting, these huge lights to try to simulate the Greek, I suppose. Down the basement was a 6-lane bowling alley and just everything like that. It was the only lodge hall we visited along the way that you didn't have to climb steps to get to the lodge room. The only one. But it was really a beautiful place. I believe that was about the only place where we got a really hot meal. We ate breakfast there, and they had eggs just right off the griddle for us. That really did pep us up, too. Then, more serious aspects, we spent the night at Lincoln, Illinois, at the Oddfellows' home there for orphans. On our bus tour were 2 girls from the Oddfellows' home in Corsicana, Texas. I really didn't know that those girls were from the home until we'd been out 3 or 4 days. They didn't seem a bit different at all. After our stay in Lincoln, I could understand why. By the treatment they received there and the surroundings they had, it was just like a big family. We really had a time. They had all kinds of sporting things there, all kinds of athletic equipment. I don't recall just exactly how many they had, how many orphans they took care of. I believe it was 150, something like that. But it's just like one big family. And I believe that was that they conducted that as near to what would really be home life as to be possibly assimilated on such a large scale as that. That's sort of a rundown, very short one, on the outstanding lodges and the outstanding activities that the lodges performed for us on our tour. It doesn't come near to expressing to any extent what the local lodges along the way did towards making our trip enjoyable, instead of making it to where we wouldn't feel at home, we wouldn't know anyone, we'd feel like we were in a strange country, something like that. It was altogether different. Everybody, all the odd fellows and Rebekahs were friendly to us. They showed us a good time. It was really something, because you really didn't see much of that friendliness there in the East, except when you got with the odd fellows. In the remaining time I have, I've tried to tell a little bit of just the United Nations itself. I think that trying to tell you of every stop we made, every sightseeing tour we took, and so forth, just bore you, because you can read, and probably many of you been most in places. Nevertheless, I feel sure that merely reading of the place doesn't provide the excitement and thrills that actual observation does, but time just doesn't permit. But the greatest impression made on me was the United Nations, because it was just amazing to me. I had read a lot about it. I had had to go through an awful lot of research in writing that theme, and after we got there, well, it was altogether different than what I had thought. Everything was so modern there, I tell you. You'd go into a building and you'd look around and everything was so modernly set and everything. You'd think, well, it's not much, but then you got to think it was supporting 38 stories of offices above that, and of course that's really something. Then in the council chambers, the only council that was in session while we were there was the trusteeship council, which dealt with the territories, trust territories they were called. These were small territories that were colonies that were owned by various governments, and these governments had turned these territories over to the United Nations in hopes that the United Nations could bring these countries up to a standard high enough to where they could be self-governing. New Guinea was the topic of discussion while we were there. We visited it 3 or 4 times, I believe. 3, yeah. Russia, of course, was represented there, but it was by, I think, what one of the men there termed an office boy. It was a very interesting thing to watch the Russians there. For example, Mr. Conrad Hansen, who has directed this pilgrimage for 4 years, says that this year was the first year that he has seen Russia vote yes to some of the resolutions. That is what he considered a very impressive forward step towards cooperation with Russia, because they had always voted no up until last year when they started abstaining, and now this year they've started voting a little bit yes. Of course, you could recognize some of the Russian hatred and so forth, so to speak, like when the resolution came up for a vote, the Russian delegate stuck up his hand and asked for recognition. He was recognized. He got up. He says, Soviet Union wished to abstain from voting on this resolution because the resolution had been introduced by the delegates from China, which Russia felt was illegally represented and did not deserve a seat there at the United Nations. Therefore, they wished to abstain from voting. So that just goes to show everything that that goes on there. Although Russia is cooperating a little bit, it's still got a long ways to go. I don't know, there's just so much to tell about the United Nations. I just really wouldn't know what to tell you. Therefore, I believe if it would be all right with you, I'd just sort of open this up as a question and answer period for as long as you'd care to keep me running that period, because it really doesn't matter to me. And I sure would like to answer some questions, because I really don't know where to begin. And don't try to limit your answers to the United Nations or New York or anything. Just ask me anything about the tour you'd like. We spent a whole day in Washington, and the night before that. The night before, some local odd fellows who knew the town pretty well got in the bus with us, and we went all around town. He pointed out various places to us. We went into the Library of Congress and looked around, and we went to the Lincoln Memorial while it was lit up. And the next day, we went just about to every spot that would deserve our time there, because they had that thing so arranged that we just got there in time for everything. I mean, when we went to the Unknown Soldiers Tomb, we just walked up there, and just as soon as we got settled here, they came and they changed the guard, and we walked right out of there. But it was really an impressive sight. Then we went to the Smithsonian Institute, and we got there about 4 o'clock. We understood they closed at 4:30, so they told us to just stay there until they heard us out of there. And we did that, and from there we went to the National Art Gallery, which closed at 5, and we stayed there until they heard us out. So we really took in about everything that was in Washington. We went through the White House, what part was open for visitors. We went to Bureau of Printing and Engraving, Washington Monument. We had the option of climbing the steps or not. And I believe half of us climbed them up, and all of us rode it down, the elevator down. And 698. And let's see, we went out by the Pentagon, and we went to, saw all the Navy buildings. I mean, all the buildings there of all branches of the service, really, that were there to protect Washington and all. We saw Arlington Cemetery, of course, when we saw the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And while we were very fortunate, in a way that is, because as we were going out, we chanced to observe a small group of soldiers drilling for a military funeral sometime that day. We had noticed earlier that if the flag at Robert E. Lee's mansion was at half-mast, and we were fortunate enough to be able to watch these soldiers drilling for a military funeral.
Well, did you, your tour take you, when you took on that boat trip now, did you get one that showed the pictures where you got to go around behind the Pentagon building and the winner did that, you just back in the United Nations building?
No, ma'am, that went all the way around Manhattan Island. We took 2 tours. They weren't planning at all on taking us out to the Statue of Liberty. That is a different boat trip altogether. But through some high pressure, I guess, we got them to do it. It was a 3-hour boat trip around Manhattan Island. Of course, it was guided. I mean, they had the loudspeaker system wired up. It's a regular boat tour. They run it every day, of course. And they pointed out all the various points of interest to us. And, of course, there's a pretty nice-sized boat. And they announced over the speaker system that they had a delegation from the states of New Mexico and Texas and Oklahoma on a tour that was sponsored by the Odd Fellows. And so we took that in, and then we just got off of one boat and onto the other and went out to Statue of Liberty, and we stayed there until it closed. and we got back, I believe we got back here, no. Yeah, we got back, and that was the night we split up. Half of them wanted to go see the ball game, the other half wanted to go see Chinatown. So they just let them both have their ways, and they counted up how many wanted to go see the ball game. They got the tickets earlier, and then so we split up there at the Battery, where the Battery Park, where the boats took off, and those that went to the ball game got on the elevated, and they went over there near the polo grounds, I believe, yeah. And they ate supper, and then they went to the game, and the rest of us walked down through Wall Street and through the Bowery and went to a Chinese restaurant. Got the menu over there that got from there. There's only one that made it going. And the Chinese newspaper I bought just outdoors there. There are 3 of them printed in New York in Chinese. From there we went up around the old City Hall building and over to Night Court, where we watched all the people that had been arrested there in that precinct during the day tried, and of course if they pled guilty, well, they paid their fine and walked out, and if they didn't, they stayed, they were put in jail and either set for trial the next morning or Friday morning. And that was very interesting. I mean, they had it in there for all kinds of charges. And it was really interesting to see that. And then from there we got on a bus and went back to the hotel.
Did you ever get to have any private conversations with these here delegates from the other countries, I mean these here from the United Nations?
No, we didn't get that. There was all groups. Well, we did one day. I was in the unfortunate group, though. That is, they split us up into groups of 5. And they had scheduled meetings with delegates at their places, at their offices, and scattered out throughout the town. The delegation that I went with visited Iran in the morning and India in the afternoon. But after waiting for an hour and a half, we found out that the Indian delegate had gone home 2 days before. But visiting the Iran delegate was very interesting. We were on the 63rd floor of the Empire State Building, and it was pouring rain, so that was the only day we had any chance to go to the Empire State Building. And they told us that if we went to the top of there, we couldn't go out on the platform. And we didn't see any reason in it anyway, because they're on the 63rd floor. I don't think you could have seen your hand out the window. Because down at the bottom, you could look up, and the building just went right up through the crowds. At any rate, visiting this Iranian delegate, ambassador, he told us of life in Iran. He told us of the way the Iranian government is functioning, what they're working towards, and tried to explain to us how false it was that Iran is filled with communists and all that. And of course it has all become very interesting here recently with all the trouble going on there in Iran now. But then he opened himself up for a question and answer period, let us get fairly personal with him, and so we could ask him questions about life there in Iran. It was all very interesting, very informative too.
What about international help?
No, that was one of the highlights of the tour. That impressed most of the kids more than any other thing we did during our tour. The International House is a dormitory, so to speak, for students that go to any college on Manhattan Island. These students come from all over the world, and they all lived there together. There were a few Americans lived there, and they told us how we could try to get in if anybody was interested. But of course, it's all very difficult for we Americans to get in. But any foreigner who is going to school to any college there on the island is eligible to live there in International House if he so desires. Our program for the night, we ate there in the cafeteria, and then that night we went to the gym there, the auditorium and gym, where an Iranian girl gave us a short talk, very short talk, and then she let us ask her a few questions. And then a Korean boy who had escaped from North Korea just before they started the Korean War, he gave us a very interesting talk, and he made quite a hit there. He then opened himself up for questions, and of course he was kept there for a long time. But he told us of all the brainwashing and the brain twisting, so to speak, all the communist methods and motives there. Told us how he had escaped, how I think there were 3 of them started out, and he was the only one that made it across the 38th parallel. It was all very interesting. It really made a hit with him because at our speech contest, which was held on the last day we were there at the YMCA building, almost everyone based their speech on the International House because it was really hard to focus your speech on any one thing. So they tried to pick something that would cover the most territory, and of course that was their visit to the International House. Say now is to try in any way that I can to express my thanks to each and every one of you for sending us. It's impossible, of course, to tell you in one speech or one conversation anything at all about what we did on the trip. Therefore, I've tried to limit this speech to what I was sure you'd be most interested in, the Oddfellow portion of it, and then to answer questions, and I was sure you would ask what you were interested in, mainly. I'd be glad to talk to any of you if you'd be interested in it. If you see me on the streets or anything, I'd be very glad to talk to you. If you ever need to fill in for a program or anything like that, I'd be very glad to come back and speak to you again. But at any rate, I just can't express myself in trying to thank you for sending me on that trip. I hadn't realized whenever I left that it was anything like it was, as coordinated as it was, because that, after we got on the trip, and especially after we came back, or coming back, and we started putting our minds to it and thinking back, well, we could just see how much the people had really gone to try to make that pack into those 3 weeks as much as possible. And it really is impossible for any other delegation, I believe, to cover so much as we did, especially at the United Nations, for example. We got on the inside there, really, because what the common tourist sees was nothing to what we saw. We got talks by people from all the organizations, Trusteeship Council, Food and Agricultural Organization, and we've got tours to places where no visitors were allowed, unless they were specially guided like we were. And Washington is the same way. Got a members pass over there to Congress now, to the House of Representatives.